their lives going forward. We are in a liminal moment, a crossing over from one way of being to another. So were the disciples. They had isolated themselves in a room, hiding from the threat that lurked outside. Sound familiar? Then Jesus walked right through that locked door and said, "Peace be with you." He was a sign that his death, which they thought was the end, was simply a new beginning. And then he showed them his hands and his side. Those wounds, of course, provided proof of identity. And yet it's kind of strange that they were still there, isn't it? You would think that emerging into a new life after an excruciating death would mean erasing the wounds of the past in order to have a fresh start. But no, the wounds remain. They remain as a reminder to the world that Jesus shares our suffering. But they also remain so that we won't forget the lessons of that suffering. The lessons of vulnerability and compassion. The lessons that the dominant systems of this world will seek to crush the life of any who oppose them. And the even bigger lesson that when we stand up to them, those systems don't get to have the final word. Think of the wounds that have been revealed over this last year. The gaping chasm between the haves and have-nots as hospitals and morgues filled with the elderly, the poor, people of color. The deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery that shook our sense of who we are as a nation and woke us up to the fact that there are two Americas, one for white people and one for everyone else. What wounds in the world and in your life became clear to you this past year?
I just couldn't deal with the lack of empathy.
Now I have very few people.
I just couldn't deal with the lack of empathy. Now I have a very few people who survived on my list of friends, and my phone is a whole lot quieter. But honestly, I wouldn't have had it any other way. Ara Diaz Arujo, Orlando, Florida.
Coming out of this, I realized emotions can't wait for another day. I'm calling my parents more and expressing my love and gratitude to them. Vaneet Singh from Memphis.
I really feel like I learned a lot during this pandemic. But this new feeling has this real feeling of emptiness I've never felt before. Justin Parker, New York.
Jesus showed his wounds to his disciples as a reminder that the lessons of the past must not be forgotten. But Thomas wasn't there to see them or his wounds. But without seeing them, he refused to believe. Those who are outside of the church also won't believe in a risen Christ if the church doesn't show his wounds. If we fail to acknowledge the deep hurts in this world, and if we seem to claim that faith brings success and solves all of life's problems, and if we act as though we ourselves are whole and unblemished, then they will know not to believe a word we say. As we begin to cross the threshold into post-pandemic life, how will we acknowledge our own pain, share our own doubts, and step into the struggle on behalf of our neighbors so that we can be credible witnesses to a resurrecting God?
My church has been paying for my rent, utilities, and food while I'm living with no paycheck. This year has stripped me from so much, but it also allowed me to focus and evaluate the big picture of my life. What kind of legacy do I want to leave behind? Becca Bruder from Alexandria, Virginia.
It forced me to let go of any notion that I could hold myself together and get on with the show. But it also made room for me to fall fully apart and look at the pieces. Since then, I've changed my housing, my church, my career plans, and the family and friends I allow in. Shelby Doyle, Melrose, Massachusetts.
I do not want to go back to before. There's a lack of compassion and help. It's all about money. When I see such inequality, unfairness, sometimes I'm like, why are we doing all this? Yasmin Karenberg from New York City.
When Jesus stepped out of the tomb, his past wasn't erased. He carried it with him. His wounds were a reminder of what matters in life. What have you learned about what matters in your life? What will you eagerly resume as you become able? And what will you let go of forever? Jesus carried the past with him, not so that he could relive it. No, thank you, right? But as a reminder to his followers to live differently, more peacefully, more courageously, more compassionately, more joyfully, more freely. May the wounds that we bear as we step back into the world guide us to do the same. Thanks be to God.